Because he's one of the crucial people in Iraq. He's the representative of the Shia poor in Iraq. Most Iraqis, 60% of Iraqis are Shia, and most of them are poor. So he leads the only real mass movement in Iraq. Saddam tried to get rid of it, killed his father-in-law. You can't marginalize people like this. And if you try, then you just increase the level of violence.
Did the U.S. going in underestimate his power, his influence, and did they perhaps misinterpret which side he'd be on?
Sure, yes. They'd never really heard of him when they came in, when they overthrew Saddam Hussein. Who is this guy, Muqtada al-Sadr? It's almost a parable, to my mind, of the disconnect in what Iraqis think about and know, and what Americans, or the whole outside world, thinks it knows about Iraq. Here is this guy nobody, despite all the intelligence service in the world, had ever heard of, suddenly takes over part of Baghdad, East Baghdad, and most of southern Iraq. Every Iraqi would know the reason why this was, that this man was the son of a very, very famous Iraqi, his father, Mohammed Sadiq al-Sadr, who built up this nationalist, populist, religious movement under Saddam Hussein, was gunned down by Saddam's gunmen, assassinated in Najaf in 1999 with two of his sons, Muqtada's brothers, and Muqtada's father-in-law was a famous theologian who was executed by Saddam in 1980. So he came from a family of martyrs. Iraqis really felt this family had suffered enormously opposing Saddam, and they compared him with Iraqi exiles coming back, whom Iraqis, often unfairly, imagined had spent their years in exile cavorting in five-star hotels in London and New York and Los Angeles. And but this was a family that suffered, and they knew the streets of Baghdad. They sort of empathized more easily with Iraqis.
Why didn't the U.S. know this story?
A number of reasons. I think, first of all, immediately, I was in Baghdad at this moment, and I'd been there a lot during the 90s. I think that they completely misinterpreted the fall of Saddam. They thought, we have defeated Iraq, the Iraqi army. But the Iraqi army didn't fight. Iraqis wanted to see the back of Saddam. He had these super loyal units. They all went home. So they thought it doesn't much matter what Iraqis think. There was a mood of hubris, of arrogance among all the Americans and any other foreigners in Baghdad immediately after the fall of Saddam. In retrospect, people think mistakes were made about dissolving the army, the police, but there was basically, they didn't much care what Iraqis thought. Only later did they discover this mattered a whole lot. So they disregarded Muqtada, they disregarded everybody else.
You have a map here in the book, and here's a map of Baghdad. A lot of people are familiar with it. Here's the green zone in this area, and over here is Sadr City. Well, before April 2003, this was named Saddam City.
Yeah.
And it was changed overnight?
Yeah, well, then it's named after Muqtada's father now.
Right. But I mean, overnight it got changed.
Sure, yeah. This was originally called al-Thawra. It was built up. It's an enormous slum. And people call it a district of Baghdad. Actually, it's almost a twin city. Saddam considered it enemy territory. His people only went in if they were armed to the teeth. And it's a slum, and that's always been the bastion of Muqtada's support.
But the significance of the name change overnight, does that represent
Sure, you know, they always hated calling it Saddam City, because that almost was the stamp of the conqueror. Saddam was a Sunni Muslim. They hated the Ba'ath Party. The people in Sadr City had been oppressed, arrested, pretty well all Shia. Very tough. They come from the south, from Amara province, from originally poor peasants, tend to be armed.
And you've been in Sadr City?
Sure, yeah.
And what was your experience like?
Well, you know, you feel, you know, you can look down the street. It doesn't, you know, it just looks very poor. I mean, my experience of people from Sadr City, is rather simple, very tough. The book begins with an account of I was almost killed in 2004 by the Mahdi army, Muqtada's militiamen, and not actually in Sadr city. The militiamen had gone to a city called Kufa. It's near Najaf, and I'd gone down there. Maybe I should tell this because it gives the flavor of what life is Iraq, not just for foreigners like me, but for all Iraqis. I'd gone down there to try and see Muqtada in Najaf, and I'd made a mistake. I'd put on a sort of disguise, not to be too melodramatic. I thought the danger was some Sunni Arab towns between Baghdad and Kufa and Najaf. So I put on a keffiyeh, a red and white headdress, not because obviously I'm not an Arab from close to, but maybe somebody looking through the car window at 50 yards will think, oh, it's an Iraqi. But in fact, the danger wasn't there. It was down the road. I ran into a Mahdi army checkpoint. They'd been fighting the U.S. Marines. Muqtada at this point was trapped in Najaf. The U.S. Marines were attacking. They were in a fairly hysterical mood. They looked in the car. They ripped off the keffiyeh, the headdress. They started screaming, "American spy, American spy." They dragged me and two Iraqis that were with me out of the car. The Iraqis, I thought, and the Iraqis with me thought, that's it, they're going to kill us. And then just at the last moment, one of them said, let's talk to our sheikh. That's not their leader in the local mosque. So they sort of piled us back into a car with their guns and took us there. And then gradually things improved. They began to ask questions. But that was my worst experience for them. But I talked to them afterwards, and they're very simple people, no money. Some of these guys had borrowed their bus fares from Baghdad, and that's very little money.
To fight in the Mahdi army.
Fight in the Mahdi army. Some of them had sold their few possessions to get a gun. So not well trained, very dangerous, but would fight to the death. And they regarded Muqtada as almost being semi-divine.
And you write that, and Muqtada doesn't make an appearance until chapter 9 in here, but you write that to understand Muqtada al-Sadr, you need to understand the history of Shi'ism. Sure,
yeah. I mean, this is really what the conflict in Iraq is all about, is, the differences. It's not just the Americans there, but the differences between the Shia and the Sunni and the Kurds, these three big communities in Iraq. The majority are the Shia. As soon as the US decided to overthrow Saddam Hussein, something was quite inevitable, that the Shia community, 60% of the population, was going to take over from the Sunni, who were 20%. And the history of the Shia, who were, it's a bit like Catholics and Protestants, but who were the underclass, were deprived of power, but had a very rich history of opposing the government, had their own religious hierarchy. One of the reasons in the book that I give this background and talk about the al-Sadr family is that if you don't understand that, then it's almost impossible to understand what goes on in Iraq at the moment.
Why is it then that Muqtada al-Sadr and Ali Sistani, who's a Grand Ayatollah for the Shia religion, are not friends or contesting each other?
Two main reasons. One, there's a theological reason that Muqtada and his family, his father and others, had an activist view of religion, that you must fight. You must fight against Saddam, maybe you get killed, you must take an active role in politics.